And next caller here, got to give this guy credit because I had no idea. He didn't tell me that he was from Australia when he emailed in, but he's calling from Australia, and I believe it is, 5:40 a.m.? Is that right, Alec?
Yeah, it's pretty early, but that's okay.
I assume you don't usually keep these types of hours. You must have woken up to make this call.
Depends on the day. If I'm playing, I'm definitely not waking up this early.
Right. Oh, maybe you're playing an overnight session.
Of course, sometimes.
All right. What game are you playing here?
So it's a 5-5 game,
5-5.
but it became a 5-5-10 game about a couple hours in.
So 5-5-10. This is in Sydney or what?
Yes.
All right. So Sydney 5-5-10, and what are the effective stacks?
It's 1.7k effective,
Okay.
but you start with, so I guess the initial buy-in structure is anywhere from 500 to 1,000.
So it's a 1k cap game. Okay.
1k cap initially, but then if you lose your first bullet, you can rebuy for 2k.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not match the stack, but if you go down to 0, you can rebuy for 2k. Is that what it is?
Yeah, if you go down to about 0, we're pretty flexible on it. It is pretty much a private game. There is no rake, but you have to tip the dealer.
Okay, so 5-5 plus 10, 1.7 effective. Okay.
Yeah. So it's 9-handed. Now under the gun, I guess pre-flop will start. We got under the gun limp. I'm in under the gun +1.
Okay.
And I raise to 50 with ace, queen of spades.
Ace of spades, queen of spades to 50. What's the normal? Are people opening to 30, 35, 40 without a limp?
I'd say 30 to 40 without a limp, somewhere in between there.
Okay. So you go to 50.
It sort of does depend on how big the stacks are as well. So throughout the night, the raise will just get bigger and bigger.
Okay.
Which is interesting. And then the button calls.
Okay.
And then the under the gun limper calls.
The limper calls and the button calls. This is kind of a similar setup to the previous hand, and the pot's probably like 165, something like that with the blinds.
Yeah, I think I've got the straddle was on this hand, so I've got 170 in there. So $20 with the small, big, and straddle.
And the straddle has been on for the most part always, right?
Yeah, well, after the first hour or two, it's been on the whole time.
Okay. All right, so 170.
Yeah, some reads on the villain. The under the gun limper plays pretty much any two hands.
Any two cards?
Pretty much any two cards. So he's a very loose, aggressive, can be aggressive as well, whale. And the button, so I wasn't expecting him to fold, so I probably could actually size up a bit more. The button is somewhat unknown, but I've played with him for a couple hours, and he seems like quite a solid player, taking a tight aggressive approach, and he seems definitely for profit. So those are the two reads I have.
Okay. All right, so go to the flop.
So the flop is the queen of diamonds, the 5 of hearts, and the 2 of hearts.
All right, so queen, 5 deuce with 2 hearts. You have ace, queen of spades, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So under the gun checks. I bet 100.
Okay.
The button calls.
Button calls.
And the under the gun folds.
So just the button who's next to act calls. 100 and call. So now we're at 370. Let's just look at your sizing here. So queen, 5 deuce, 2 hearts out there. You're kind of going right around, say, 2/3. In live poker, I don't, with a propensity for people to play a lot of offsuit Broadway types of holdings, I don't really mind it. And even if the limper had like a pair, like a pocket pair, I don't think he's just folding here to 100. I mean, you don't have to go quite as large, I think, that I would typically do in a single raise pot on a Broadway 2 flush board. But I don't mind the sizing. You just have to understand that button calling next to act should be stronger than him closing the action. It would be better if you had an overpair here so that you'd have more queen X, but you have the best queen. So he could also have a flush draw, stuff like that. So 370 here to the turn.
Yeah, I was somewhat targeting the under the gun player in the hand because he doesn't like folding. So I think he was going to peel with any pair, any flush draw, or any gut shot, stuff like ace 3, ace 4. But obviously the stronger player called. The turn is the queen of clubs.
Queen of clubs. Interesting.
Trips. I get the best trips, of course.
Yep.
Now I bet 270.
So hero bets 270 here. Now, see, we talk about this sometimes because my gut reaction here with a next to act caller, I've talked about some strategies of check raising turn as the pre-flop raiser. And it can be in a little bit more extreme scenarios. Here, you're 3 ways on the flop. He calls next to act. If you could sort of picture a situation where you had c-bet into like 4 or 5 players, you had like the field to your left and next to act called, and then everybody else folded. It fits into what I'm about to say about sometimes check raising turn a little bit better, because then there's a really good chance that guy has a queen. But when you take a look at the range that calls you on the flop from the button with a guy behind you, what do you think on the flop that range consists of on queen 5 deuce 2 hearts?
So I think there's a lot of queen X in the range. A lot of flush draws. I think if I'm thinking he mostly 3-bets tens and jacks on the flop, but he might peel with 9s, 8s, 7s, maybe with a heart on the flop. Even with somebody behind, there is a small chance that he does flat with, say, pocket 5s or pocket deuces to keep the under the gun whale in.
Yep.
And I think those are really the only strong hands that he might have here that beat me.
So when we take a look at that range of holdings, because what I was going to say is that if we check and he has a queen, he's going to bet. And I don't think anybody in a private game in Australia at this level is going to fold to a check raise. It's a way to get more money into the pot. So there's that. If you know he's got a queen, you check, as opposed to coming out and betting like this, especially for somewhat of a large sizing, he's just going to call a lot if you take this sizing. Now, if he has a flush draw here, a lot of times like the initial reaction would be he would bet that too, but it's not you're not necessarily going to get a bet from a front door flush draw, because just because you check on this card doesn't mean that you're going to check fold. You're going to be checking on this card a lot unless you have like a queen anyway. So if you check and he has a flush draw and he doesn't bet, you lose the value of possibly getting called from a flush draw. The hands like 8s and 9s, the hands that aren't 3-bet off pre, are interesting because they might very well check through, and you might be able to get value at the end if you check and he checks it back. If you take this type of sizing, I guess the question really becomes, would he continue to call like 7s, 8s, 9s, and would he continue to call like on a flush draw? So I don't mind the bet here as opposed to going for a check raise I think for a number of reasons. And I think it really comes down to he might continue to call you with like 8s or 9s. He is not auto betting a flush draw on this card. The difference is when you get a blank and you're the pre-flop raiser and you check. If a guy's got like Jack 10 of hearts here and the turn is like an offsuit 8 and you check now when it doesn't really connect with the board, Jack 10 of hearts, not only does it pick up a gut shot, but it should tend to bet way, way more because of the fact that you're checking a blank turn. Whereas here, you're checking, this is not a blank turn, so you don't have somebody in position that's going to auto bet a flush draw unless they don't understand the game. So that's really kind of what it comes down to. I don't know if you were considering check raising turn here or what.
I don't think I was in the moment, but it's a good thing you bring up. I think I was mainly targeting, obviously, worse Queen X or Queen X of hearts as well. I didn't think flush draws were folding just because we're quite deep. There's a lot behind on the river if he calls.
Yep. And you didn't want a flush draw to check through too.
Exactly as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this guy would check a flush draw. Maybe a lower flush draw he might, maybe like ace 3, ace 4 of hearts he might not. But yeah, that was my reasoning for betting. I probably could have bet bigger, honestly, if I'm targeting just Queen X and a flush draw.
I mean, the only thing that I would say, though, too, is you say this guy's a solid player. You don't necessarily know how he develops a flat range here because there's a limper, you raise pre, and he just calls. That should be like, that's not many hands. Like that hand is very incentivized to 3-bet to get the limper out and the blinds in a 3-betting type of format. Because another queen comes and you have ace queen, there really aren't all that many combos of queens that are left. I would think that he would like 3-bet king queen suited. So you're kind of left with like queen jack suited and queen 10 suited as maybe like the flats. And because there's 3 queens that are already accounted for, there's only like a couple of queen X suiteds that are there. So he probably doesn't have that much queen X if you think he's a solid player. Now, if he's a guy that's VPipping really high and he's playing any offsuited Broadway types of holdings, that's a little bit different. And by the way, you can see how if you had like 5s full here, it would most likely be a better spot to go for a check raise, giving your opponent the opportunity to have more queen X. You don't care if the flush comes through. If he checks through and you make a flush, oh, that's even better, right? So
Sure. Yeah, no, there isn't that much queen X. I think it's just assuming he's not playing any offsuit queens, like king queen off, ace queen off. That's it.
And by the way, I said queen 10. It's actually the heart variety that's out there, which is funny. It's the flush draw variety with trips. But okay, so you go 270.
Yeah, I go 270 and he just calls.
So button calls again. I think I like the way that you've played it so far, to be honest with you. So 540 plus 370. Now we're looking at what, 910? And you guys started with 1700 and you've put in 374.20. So you have just under 1300 left. So about a pot and a half size bet left, right?
Yeah, I think I wrote the total pot wrong in the email, but I just realized that now. So it is, yeah. It's 910 to the river.
Okay.
And then the river is the 10 of hearts.
So the front door comes in.
Yes.
Right. Well, that sucks. I mean,
yeah, I guess my initial reaction was, well, that's not a good card.
Yeah, and the other thing, I mean, I think that this definitely needs to be reflected with the check for the same reasons I was talking about the way that he constructed his pre-flop range here. If king queen suited, like 3 bets off. Although there is no queen 10 suited anymore. But I do think that there's going to be a fair amount of flush draws. Now, where you might get, where it kind of comes into play here, where it gets a little bit tricky, is if you check, and then you're up against a guy that might think is capable of turning a hand, some sort of hand, into a bluff. Like if he was heroing you down with like 7s or 8s, and then now you checked, and he's just like, oh, this is just too good of a card. But we'll see if you face that. I assume you checked here.
Yeah, I did check.
Okay.
Hoping for either a small bet or a check behind, honestly. And then villain bet 625, so about 2/3.
625. So pot's going to be 1500-ish, 1535, 625 for you to call. So you're getting what, 2.5 to 1?
Yep.
2.5 to 1. I'll ask you the same question I asked the previous caller. So what is your equity here in terms of a percentage? We know you have to be good 1 out of 3.5 times. What's about your approximate equity here in order to make this call that you need to have?
Is it 28?
Yeah, about 28, right? 1 over 3.5. Just as we're doing a math lesson here on the call-in show. This is a shitty spot. I mean, it's definitely a shitty spot. The only thing that I would say here, and somebody had pointed this out, if you really want to go into the theory of like deep in the woods, into the weeds of theory, someone said on the turn that they would be checking a lot because they'd be checking aces or kings. To flip that to the river here, if you are betting a flush from up front and you're betting boats from up front on this run out, like say you were betting a flush draw on the come and you made it at the end, or you had a boat and you made it at the end, if you are betting all those hands on the river, then this is probably the very strongest hand that you can end up with here at the end. If you're doing that, we're talking about looking at this from a minimum defense frequency, MDF, that word is being thrown around sometimes, standpoint. Now, we know that you're getting 2.5 to 1 in pot odds. When your opponent bets 2/3 the size of the pot, that means that his bluff only needs to work about 40% of the time for it to be profitable, which means you're supposed to defend down with 60% of the range that you arrive here with. And the somewhat complicated extra piece of that is how would you specifically play a hand that you arrive with throughout the entire hand, which is a bet check. And some could make the argument that this is really like one of the strongest hands that you're ever going to arrive with. That is if you always bet flushes at the end and boats, which is why when you get up to the higher stakes, people tend to take a more balanced line. Take that.
No, I sent this to a friend. Yeah, I sent this to a friend of mine, and he actually asked me the same question. He said, what do you bet check and then call with on the river?
Yeah.
And I said, I think I'd throw in some pocket 5s, pocket deuces to check raise flushes, potentially.
It's actually not a bad thought if you played the turn as a bet, right?
Yeah.
Because, and the reason why
I think those are the only hands, yeah.
Yeah, but the reason why that's not a bad thought is because if you check this river, if you just come out and go bet, bet, bet with fives and deuces, a queen might just call you. If you check, a queen might bet. And a smaller flush very well might just call you too if you just go bet, bet, bet. So you do have some of those hands in there too. And then the issue just comes like, so you've got fives and deuces. If you play it like that, where does
ace? Maybe like queen 10 of spades as well, potentially.
Like a boat that's a queen, because he's just always going to have a flush a lot, right? Where I would revert back to in this spot, and again, you say that this guy is a decent player, is in order for him to be bluffing here, he has to be turning something into a bluff. Now, you can play a hand like this, although I will go back to the flop. Like if the button had like 5-6 suited here and they were heads up, you can sometimes play a hand like 5-6 suited on a front door flush draw type of board, like if you had 5-6 of diamonds, as a hand that's a draw where you're going to bluff the flush as well and kind of treat it like, in essence, like a 14 out type of draw. But the problem here is that he called with the guy behind him, and then he doesn't really pick up any type of additional equity on turn, where now his 2 pair outs are no good when the queen comes. So I kind of tend to discount that. And the only thing that I'm sort of left with is like a hand like 8s or 9s, maybe, with a heart that feels like it now needs to turn it into a bluff. And
yes, it's pretty much, pocket 8s, pocket 9s, maybe some pocket 10s with not pocket 10s, excuse me.
Well, pocket 10s makes a boat. Yeah.
Yeah, pocket 10s, boat. 9s, 8s, 7s with a heart, which is what I was trying to think of any like single ace of hearts type hands, but I really can't find any.
Now, some people in the live chat are saying this should be a bet, bet, and then bet, fold. The only way that can be true is if the opponent, if the hero wanted to take a bet fold line instead of a check fold line, his opponent would have to call with more than 50% of hands against the hero's bet. And I don't know if that's the case here. You know what I mean?
I agree. I think there's not many queen X that can actually call now, because they're all flushes, like queen jack of hearts, queen
Right.
9 of hearts. The only offsuit queen that I'm beating, assuming he's not flatting like queen jack off, is like king queen off.
Right.
Ace queen off, I'm chopping with king queen off. I'm obviously ahead of.
I mean, the only thing that you could say here is that if he's v-pipping some offsuit queens, would he bet the river with like king queen or queen jack here at the end for 625?
I think so. Definitely, if he had a heart, I think he would be betting for sure.
I mean, if you can find some hands that are worse than yours that might be value betting, like a king queen or a queen jack off, and you only need to find a couple those hands plus some bluffs at like a 1 to 3.5 ratio to in order to make this call. Some people in the live chat also saying, well, you could check raise, turn your hand into a bluff. I don't think they're anywhere deep enough to make that play. When the guy goes 625, he's just not going to be folding out thick value. A lot of people, as they go towards PLO, they start to think that usually doesn't work. I can see the number. I can remember the number of times that's ever worked. One of which was actually Andy against Garrett on Live at the Bike that I was commentating. But those guys were super, super deep. Yeah, man, this is a tough one. I mean, it's hard to fold sometimes, like with such a strong hand. So sometimes I might flick in like a call here. And again, I think it would kind of come down to if I ever saw the guy play some sort of offsuit Broadways. But the whole nature of the hand with him calling next to act with the guy behind, and then him probably not continuing on with any type of like 5x because the queen comes on the turn. I don't love it. What did you end up doing?
I folded. I did go on the tank for a little bit, and I think everybody at the table knew what I had after I was tanking. But I did fold. I didn't get a reveal. But one of the other players on the table did make a quick comment about there's no way I could have folded a queen there. He was definitely bluffing, which I thought was interesting. But I hadn't played with this guy much before. But he doesn't seem like that much of an aggressive player. But, I could be wrong. We'll never know.
Well, this call will probably get flamed in the YouTube when we make it a best of, because there's a lot of commenters out there that say, what's the point of putting on a hand with no reveal? Well, I think we went over a lot of higher level concepts and how you think. I mean, everyone's trying to learn the game, right? I mean, sure, I would love to hear people think if this is a good or a bad fold. It doesn't really matter what the reveal is. I think it's fairly close. I don't think anybody would say it was slam dunk necessarily either way. And sometimes a reveal can actually skew our results too, right? Like if you had said, "Oh, I called, the guy had a flush," right? People would be like, "Oh, what a terrible call." "Oh, I called and he was bluffing. That was such an easy call. Why is this even a hand?" You know?
Yeah, I think in the moment I was like, oh, it's pretty close, and
Yeah.
it definitely was in the moment. And I think for me, I was kind of happy with the fact that I did fold because I think usually I'll just flick it in and be like, oh, my hand's too strong. But glad I thought about it. I'm still happy with it.
Well, thank you very much for the call. Thanks for getting up so early.